Today we are in Dallas because, well, we're checking out the Red Bull showcase. Gonna see an actual F1 Red Bull race car. Super pumped about that. But also, we're testing out the brand new Sony A7IV. Pumped. Is that Checo? Is that Checo? Is that Checo? Is that Checo? It's Checo! Checo! That was Checo!
If you want to cut straight to the point, the Sony A7IV is a near-perfect hybrid full-frame camera that can shoot stunning 33 megapixel photos and beautiful 4K video equally well. It's really right down the middle. You should definitely get it, and if you don't, ask your mom. The 15 stops of dynamic range, 7K over sampling, 4K 60 frames per second, 10-bit 422 video, S-Cinetone, 5-axis stabilization, including active stabilization, live streaming capabilities, and new features like breathing compensation and focus map just make this camera perfect for an event like this and will absolutely do well for many professional and personal projects.
I don't know what I'm more excited about, the camera or just seeing Checo. This is awesome.
All right, let's talk about the exterior. The Sony A7IV camera body is pretty much the same body as the Sony A7S III, except with a bigger grip. All the buttons around the camera are essentially the same as the A7S III, but the only significant thing that's a little bit different is the mode dial on top of the camera. The mode dial on most Sony cameras have the usual suspects. You have your manual mode, your shutter priority, aperture priority, your custom dials 1, 2, 3, etc., etc. But you don't see the movie, photography, or S&Q modes on top of this dial. Those modes are actually featured on a secondary dial underneath the top dial. So if you want to switch to video mode, there is a bottom switch that you have to toggle and just swipe it over to video mode. Same thing if you want to switch over to photography mode or S&Q mode. But the great thing about that is that you can now separate your custom photography settings from your custom video settings. So for example, I often like shooting in 3 different video settings: 4K at 24 frames per second, 4K at 60 frames per second, and HD at 120 frames per second. I can program those specific video settings to custom dials 1, 2, and 3, but when I switch over to photography mode, those video settings won't be applied to those custom dials. I can now use a completely different set of custom photography settings when I'm in photography mode. So that, I think, is really cool. Just gives us more options to save specific video or photography settings. The A7IV features a fully articulating flippy screen, and so that's nice. And yeah, essentially the same camera body as the A7S III, except with a bigger grip. Oh, and it's the same touchscreen menu from the A7S III, so yay. As far as ports goes, well, let me show you. Well, just like the A7S III, the A7IV features a full HDMI port, which is very nice for you video lovers out there. And for the other ports, you have a mic jack, a headphone jack, a USB-C port, and a micro HDMI port. There are 2 media card slots that you can use SD cards at UHS 2 speeds, but the top media card slot, you can also use a CF Express Type A card, which is really awesome, especially for those of you that shoot 4K 10-bit video, 422, or for you photographers that want to shoot high-speed raw photos. I love the fact that the A7IV can give you an option to use a CF Express Type A card if you want to. You can't use them at the same time, like you can't insert an SD card and a CF Express card on the top slot. It's either 2 SD card slots or 1 SD card slot on the bottom and a CF Express Type A card on the top. And as you probably guessed, the Sony A7IV uses the Sony Z batteries, the same batteries as the A7S III. And I think the overall build of the camera is pretty solid. Again, very similar to the A7S III. It's rugged, it's weather sealed, and feels really, really balanced. And I do really like the bigger grip of the camera, just because it just makes it easier to hold, especially if you attach a long lens with this camera. So as far as exterior goes, the A7IV is pretty awesome. On the photography side, the Sony A7IV can shoot 828 continuous RAW and JPEG photos and has real-time eye autofocus for humans, animals, and now birds. Same goes for video. Speaking of which, there are new features on the A7IV that are actually really helpful. One is breathing compensation, which compensates focus breathing by some crazy AI and cropping in on your shot just a little bit. The other new feature on the A7IV is focus map, which is a depth of field visualization of what's focused in your shot. It's actually pretty useful when you're trying to manually focus, definitely much better than trying to use focus peaking. Oh, and you're probably wondering about the ISO performance of the A7IV.
All right, so now we're gonna do a low light test of the A7 IV. We're gonna shoot 4K, 24 frames per second. We're gonna shoot an S-Log 10-bit video starting at ISO 200. And this is at a f2.8. Here we go. ISO 250, ISO 320, ISO 400, ISO 500, ISO 640, ISO 800, ISO 1000, ISO 1250, ISO 1600, ISO 2000, ISO 2500, ISO 3200, ISO 4000, ISO 5000, ISO 6400, ISO 8000, ISO 10000, ISO 12800, ISO 16000, ISO 20000, ISO 25600, ISO 32000, ISO 40000, ISO 51200, ISO 64000, ISO 80000, and ISO 10200. Looks like right there 3200 does something funky at 25600, but then at 32,000 this also looks a bit grainy. Yeah, 32,000 seems like. Let's do that again. All right, so now I'm going to do a low light test of the A7 IV. We're going to shoot an S-Log 3 starting at ISO 200. Here we go. ISO 200, ISO 250, ISO 320, ISO 400, ISO 500, ISO 640, ISO 800, ISO 1000, ISO 1250, ISO 1600, ISO 2000, ISO 2500, ISO 3200, ISO 4000, ISO 5000, ISO 6400, ISO 8000, ISO 10000, ISO 12800, ISO 16000, ISO 20000, ISO 25600, ISO 32000, ISO 40000, ISO 51200, ISO 64000, ISO 80000, and ISO 102400. Trash. Overall, I really like the camera. I think it's great. And I think it's really great for people that want to take really high quality photos and really high quality 4K video, 10-bit 422 video. And I think it's great for someone like me, a dad, a creator, someone that wants to have a camera out, take high quality, high resolution pictures of their kids, and take really high quality 4K video. I think the A7 IV is the perfect hybrid camera. It is kind of weird that you can't film 4K 60 at full frame. It is in crop mode. That's a little bit sus, but when you're filming with a full frame camera, you kind of expect to film in full frame. So yeah, 4K 60 crop, it's okay, but at least I get to film in 4K 10-bit.
So where does the Sony A7 IV fit in all of Sony's full frame camera line? Well, first you have the entry full frame camera, the A7C, followed by the A7 III. Next is the A7 IV, and with the A7 IV, I think is the best hybrid camera to shoot incredible photos and incredible videos equally well. It's a perfect hybrid camera. Now from here, I think the Sony Alpha line splits into two. One into photography, where you have cameras like the Sony A7R III or the A7R IV, and then of course the Sony Alpha 9 Mark II. And then for the video side, you have the Sony A7S III, and also the Alpha 1, which I guess is the flagship camera, the camera to rule them all. That's also a camera that shoots incredible photos and videos equally well, just really, really well. So the Sony Alpha 1 is like the ultimate hybrid camera, and the Sony A7 IV is a baby version of the Alpha 1. So my final thoughts on the A7 IV. I love this camera. I think this is a great photography camera. I mean, shooting 33 megapixel photos with incredibly fast autofocusing precision is just such a delight to shoot. And on the video side of things, like beautiful 4K 10-bit video, 4K 60, albeit Super 35 mode, but still 4K 60. But great video features, great photography features. I think the Sony A7 IV is the perfect budget-friendly hybrid camera. I mean, it's not budget friendly, but it's definitely cheaper than the Sony Alpha 1. And if you're someone like me, like a creator who's also a dad and wants to take great photos of their family, like this camera is amazing to do just that. Like it kind of does it all, really. Definitely an updated version of the A7 III and something worth upgrading to. And overall, just a really solid camera. And if you're looking for a camera that shoots photos and videos equally well, then this is the camera to get, the Sony A7 IV. Oh boy, that was a lot. All right, let's wrap this up.
And that is the Sony A7 IV in all its glory. And if you want to check it out, links will be down below. Huge thanks to Sony for sending this camera out over to me. I love it, I really do. I'm gonna pre-order. Let me know in the comments below if you're gonna pre-order this camera. But that's it. I'm gonna go shoot more of this camera. It's such a fun camera to have. All right guys, I'm out. See ya.